see Jesus coming in glory, when he comes from his home in the sky, then we shall meet him in that bright mansion. We'll understand it all by and by. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long, while there are others living about us, never molested, going the wrong. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When death has come and taken our loved ones, it leaves our home so lonely and drear. Then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When we see Jesus coming in glory, when he comes from his home in the sky, then we shall meet him in that bright mansion. We'll understand it all by and by. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long, while there are others living about us, never molested, going the wrong. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When death has come and taken our loved ones, it leaves our home so lonely and drear. Then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When death has come and taken our loved ones, it leaves our home so lonely and drear. Then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When we see Jesus coming in glory, when he comes from his home in the sky, then we shall meet him in that bright mansion. We'll understand it all by and by. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long, while there are others living about us, never molested, going the wrong. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When death has come and taken our loved ones, it leaves our home so lonely and drear. Then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. Farther along we'll know all. Right. Okay. Yeah, if there's anyone would like to help out with Glenda with maybe some clothes and some sorting and packing, that could be probably a tremendous help. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Roy. Got a 3-story house. Yeah, it's a big house. Yeah, that's really an opportunity there to help our sister. So thank you. All right, 1 Timothy 5. Go ahead and be turning over there. We're going to try to finish this chapter 5. 1 Timothy 5. We had finished up the section where he's dealing with no less, we talked about close to 16 verses on the instructions and care for widows. And that is no small matter. That is no small concern for God. We might kind of think, well, that was cultural, and there were cultural circumstances we talked about. They didn't have Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and other state resources to help individuals. It was you were at the mercy of the community if you lost your spouse, particularly a woman, if she did not have children. And so there was needs here. And this was a big part of the early church. The widows, the orphans, and remember, the stranger or the foreigner in the land. You want to get on the Lord's bad side, start messing with those individuals, those groups of people. And so the widows, we know that was a big part of the early ministry of the church. I believe it was very much the central part of the work of deacons in the book of Acts. We talked about that. Acts 6, I believe, is the prototype we talked about for those deacons. Now we know that work would extend beyond just care of widows and physical needs. It can be more than that, but it was at the core, and that dealt with the qualifications. You remember that these are to be men who are honorable. They know how to keep things quiet as they're going from house to house, seeing and hearing all sorts of things, and their wives also need to be in that same level of character. So that was a big part of the work, and we'll come back to that in just a moment as well. And so we looked at that, and it is not, as we said, it is not limited that the church can't help anyone that is, as he gives qualifications for those that can be kind of long-term supported by the church. But he does give these qualifiers about they've served, they've given to others and been devoted to good works. Now they are to receive that. But of course their family is to first and foremost take care of them, and if not, the church is to fill in. So we finished that up, and so we get down here in verse 17, and we got down through verse 18. So we started talking about elders, and a big problem at the church at Ephesus we've talked about, where Paul has left Timothy, is to confront and address false teaching. And we talked about it primarily would begin and come out of, remember, the leadership. You go back to Acts, when Paul tells the Ephesian elders, among your own men are going to rise and not sparing the flock. And so the elders' primary first task is to shepherd other elders and to be on guard and to make sure that they are not leading the flock astray. And so this is a problem in Ephesus. The leadership, a failure in the leadership. False teaching has arisen. Others have risen up. We talked about that in chapter 2 with some of the women who were stepping into that, and Paul has to give instructions about who can speak in the assembly. And so now we're coming back to some of this. And so what do we do with bad elders? What do we do with elders who are in sin? And that's going to be key here. We're going to come back to in just a moment here. Let me get caught up. We talked about, I don't want to go back, but we did talk about these are particularly elders, as he mentioned there, remember, that are worthy of double honor, especially those in preaching and teaching. And so there were elders who were gifted, called by God in full-time teaching and preaching. And so they were also to be supported financially. That was something, we don't think about that in our context. Normally we just think of ministers, and they are to be supported. That is biblical, to pay the preacher. I told you, I had an instructor at Harding that said, you can't back down from that when it's your time to teach on that. It's biblical to pay the preacher. And so don't muzzle the ox. Paul would say those that, preach the gospel should make their living from the gospel. So it's biblical, even though Paul did not, in Corinth, receive support financially for the sake of appearance. And so, but elders, there were these elders who had devoted themselves to full time. And so that also tells me that not all elders are called and gifted in the same area. And so some elders are certainly gifted and called in this area, and they are worthy to be supported. And so that's what we looked at. But then he gets into, those are the good elders, but we come back to the leadership issue of, get caught up there. And I think verse 20 there, as you get into verse 19, do not entertain an accusation against an elder unless it is brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. But those elders who are sinning, I think some of the translations, I think the ESV maybe, says that persist in sin. And so this is what is the crux here of the matter. These are not elders, an elder who has struggled in a moment, has made a bad decision, maybe lost his temper, said something he shouldn't have done, or whatever, and we say, well, okay, you're sinning, you've sinned, and so we're to pounce on you. That's not the idea here. These are elders who are persisting in willful disobedience to the Lord. That is very important here, that we understand that. The qualifications for elders we talked about, let's go back, just remember, They're to be above reproach. And you remember what we said, that doesn't mean they don't have any sin. But it means that you can't pin something to their life and say, you say one thing and claim one thing, but you live another way. That's what he's talking about, the hypocrisy. Now, all Christians, I've said, beyond the family qualifications, these are all Christians should be striving for this. But to be an elder, a servant, a leader in the church, you have to reach that level of maturity. And so you can't pin on them, you claim this, but this is how you're living out here. And so you are persisting in sin. You are continuing in sin. And so he's going to talk about that. What do we do? What is the church's? These are the leaders, right? These are the ones who are shepherding and overseeing the church, and they have this, if you will, this authority that God has given them. But if they go off stray, what recourse does the church have? You can see the dilemma there. Do they just go along? Do they just accept it? Do they just... No. And so the Lord gives, of course, teachings and instructions on this. Now, what's he say there? That not to entertain an accusation against an elder, but on the what? Okay, why is that important? As a principle. Yeah, absolutely. There could be exaggeration. There could be and even if it's not intentional, a gross misunderstanding could take place, right? Have you ever been in situations where you've, whoa, hey, wait, no, you misunderstand what happened. You walked in at the wrong time and you heard and you think you saw. And have you ever been in those situations where I can't believe that, and the worst is when they leave and you didn't get a chance to go explain what they did. We were joking. We've all been in moments even like that. And so this isn't, even if it's not intentional, a gross misunderstanding, and people can take something and what can they do with what they think they saw or heard, and they can start what? Start spreading it, telling everybody, this is what I saw, this is what I heard. Well, is it what you really saw? Is it what you really heard? What do we say? Context is what? Is everything, right? Context is everything. And of course, how is this this is a principle in the Old Testament, you remember? Deuteronomy chapter 19 and verse 15, one witness is not enough to convict a man of a crime. It must be established by 2 or 3 witnesses. The credibility, right? Yeah, Ron? Right? Right. Right. Those are really scary, those are dangerous, and yet those are more common than we wish would be the case, where people do that, whether it's in relationships or work or in the church. And elders are going to be open to all sorts of people looking at them, seeing them, hearing them. They're putting themselves out there. Ministers as well. Kind of the idea they used to tell us is you're going to live in a glass house. And people are going to see in and see and hear. And again, sometimes there can be exaggeration. There can be misunderstanding. There can be assumptions that they're making. And so this is important here that we've seen this. Again, the elder qualifications should, put down the normal charges. And again, Paul is not saying these are infallible men, but elders that are to be held accountable. And when elders are caught in sin or are committing sin or persisting in sin, or in this case as well, they're blatantly teaching things contrary to Scripture, and Timothy's having to correct that, there's a recourse that the church has. Elders are to be held accountable. No one is above what? reproach, or no one's above, the law, so to speak. Everyone is to be held accountable. Everyone is to be responsible, is to be held responsible. A person's position cannot be an excuse to hurt others, to commit sin, to abuse their power. We've seen that, right? And we've seen that even in our nation. There are no executive, in that sense, executive privileges. You remember that with our history with President Nixon, that said, certain things are off limits that I may have said or done, and the Supreme Court there said, no, 9-0. You got to turn them tapes over. You don't get to hide behind that. And that's the idea here, is an elder can't say, I'm an elder. Who are you to question, right? You ever heard someone do that, whether it's an elder or, have you ever heard someone do that? How dare you, right? You don't have the right. You don't know what I do. You don't have my responsibility. They can throw that back in your face, can't they? And it can be kind of, you can be pushed back easily and go, well, I guess I don't know what your responsibility. That's right, you don't. So I can talk and chew someone out and act and, no, you're no one's above being held accountable. And that's, I think that's important here. But again, it needs to be established by not petty disputes, not personality quarrels. They must be real, not imagined. And there's just a lot of people that imagine a lot of things, and that are just not the case. So 2 or 3 credible witnesses are to be established. And this is probably, we'll touch on this, this is probably exactly in conjunction with Matthew 18. Paul is very much aware, the Holy Spirit is inspired, that this is in conjunction with everything Jesus said, which was what? Go to your brother first if he's caught in sin, and what? Try to work it out. If he rejects that, and then what? Take some witnesses that are privy to that are aware of that. That mean just grab, hey, you, come with me. That's not what it's saying there, okay? Galatians would say, you who are spiritual should restore what? The brother in sin. So we're not, this isn't just grab anyone to, yeah, go ahead, James. Oh, yeah, it sure would be. I mean, it sure would be. Absolutely. And so, Timothy, and remember, what's the temptation we've talked about with Timothy? He's been plopped down right in the middle of a hotbed situation. He's young. We said mid-30s, late 30s, maybe 40. He's going to have to go and confront these older, seasoned elders. And he doesn't need to have the big head. He doesn't need to come in guns blazing. We've established that, how you treat an elder, how you treat each other in the church as brother. And so Timothy's not to come in guns blazing. He's to come in with grace and humility. And so that would apply to these elders as well, as he's going to do that. And so it's going to complement everything Jesus would say that you need to do. But you do need to act. And so this can be difficult for a young minister, but it's he has this responsibility. And so verse 20, those elders who are, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry. Yeah, Tony. Yeah, I would say 9 times out of 10, Tony. I think as long as it's a safe situation, it's not always the best that someone go and confront the person. If you can't control yourself, if you've been in a situation where you've been really, really harmed and hurt, it may be wise to seek someone, elder, minister. But I agree, 8, 9 times out of 10, we should absolutely try to resolve it with the person. And again, I've even seen that when elders are appointed, where people are, if you've got a problem, go talk to an elder that's being put forward, and if that elder isn't mature enough to handle someone coming and asking a question, that's probably a good indication that they're probably not have the temperament. But absolutely, go and try to resolve that with them. And so, but these are elders who are persisting. They are not listening. They're being confronted and not repenting. And so that's what we get into here. Those elders who are persistent in sin, who keep on sinning, you are to reprove. Now this is interesting. Before what? What's it say there? Hello? Verse 20, end of verse 20. What's yours say, Keith? Publicly. Presence of all. Why that? Now, again, we haven't shortcut the process, right? Go to them first. Tony was talking about that. Bring some couple of witnesses that are credible, spiritual, that are privy to that information and know what's going on, that they can be there as a witness to that confrontation or that discussion. Yesterday, we had one of the speakers talk about when elders have to have difficult conversations. That's how we would call that. But now, when that all fails, now this is to be brought before the church. Because this is something that is done openly, that's being done openly, isn't it? This, again, don't think this is someone who's struggling on the side with something and maybe somebody off the side sees them struggling. And they're openly sinning. They are openly in defiance to what God's Word says. They've been confronted privately. They've been brought with spiritual witnesses that can corroborate and to what's going on. They still reject that. They still persist. Now it's to be brought before the church. Now, church, go ahead, Keith.
Well, we're still, even publicly, still trying to get them to change their ways.
Mm-hmm.
Stop sinning.
Yeah. And this is impacting, let's come back to this, why this is before the church. This is impacting the church. We've talked about that. These false teachers are shipwrecking what? People's faith. They're leading people astray. And so this is a public matter as far as this is affecting the church. And so it is important that this be done in a way that the rebuke reflects that. If they continue to persist in that. And so again, now I will say this about Matthew 18 in general. The whole thing is predicated on having a relationship. Let me just say this. You get bonus this morning on this. A relationship is predicated. People have to want to be in the church and miss the church. To even have the possibility to withdraw from them, that threat has to mean something. There needs to be established a relationship. And so before we get to Matthew 18, often, at least the final stages of that, we ought to get busy developing relationships with each other, where we are credible, where we can have trust with each other. And that's often why Matthew 18 has either been failed or it's no longer used, because there's no basis for relationships. And again, remember 1 Timothy 5, 1 and 2, we are brother, we are sister. You treat the older Christian as a father. You treat the older ladies as mothers. That's relationships. And in churches, when we don't know each other in love and have healthy relationships, we're not going to be able to do this kind of hard dealing with sin in each other's lives, and certainly in any sort of withdrawing from an erring brother. And so that I just want to say that in regard to that in this. Any other thoughts, comments on that, what he's saying here, and things that you take away from that there in through verse 20? Verse 21, I think, is kind of a good, so it's kind of a swing verse. Keep the rules without prejudging. I charge you in the sight of God. You see that language sometimes when, commissioning a minister, an elder, when the Bible has something very strong, very serious to say to those in positions of leadership, or that, I charge you. This is this strong it's a severity. There'll be witness there's going to be, this is a witness. It indicates the seriousness of trying to impress upon somebody. Timothy is to not show, in the sight of God and Christ Jesus and the elect angels. We could go down that rabbit hole a little bit. Angels are often used. I mean, I believe those are angelic beings. Some believe those are human messengers. I don't believe that, but I don't really want to debate that necessarily. But I just want you to see the seriousness of the angels are often witnesses of what takes place in the church. We see that in 1 Corinthians. And so, this with God, with the holy angels, elect angels of God, they're witnessing this. And so you keep these instructions without partiality. Do nothing out of what? Favoritism. Do you remember in the book of Acts? Let's go back to the widows thing. What was one of the first major crisis controversies that hit the church, that could have split the church open there? Yeah. There was partiality that was being shown, right? Maybe. I think it was more just good old-fashioned, they're not us. They're second. They're second class. They are, it's kind of like, this is a similar, I mean, it's not an exact example, obviously, but it's kind of like I've heard cases where I was at Crosstown for 9 years. They had a merger with a smaller congregation that came over and joined them in 95. And there was feelings at times, because I was there 9 years, and so there was members there who were part of came over from Springdale. There were the Crosstown members, and so I heard these stories there. They were still very a part of the history, and there was those feelings of, we sometimes we got the impression that we were kind of secondary over here. We were kind of the secondary members. And so you add a cultural, racial component to this, a language component, which was very important. And absolutely, there was this kind of snubbing of this. And it doesn't have to be the blatant, I don't want to help you because you're this, right? It could just be, well, these are kind of my people. I got to help them first. I got to kind of, it's kind of like with your family, close friends. Yeah, I want to help my own first. And it's not that I'm against you, but you're kind of, and that really, boy, you've been in situations, haven't you, where someone has showed favoritism. And that can really, really cause problems. And there should be fairness. There should be equality. There should be, everyone should be treated lovingly in the church. And so, and feel supported. And when people are not, this is going to lead to division. And so he says, you do this without partiality. You make sure that you do this. And then verse 22 here, let's see if we can get to the chapter here. He says, let's get here. Don't lay hands on, do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, and do not share in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. This is probably, as we mentioned here, in the ordaining of elders, you would see the laying on of hands. And we talked about that with even Timothy, along with the laying on of the hands of the presbyter. Remember we talked about that? So the elders had also had laid their hands on Timothy, probably the call and commission to be an evangelist, that he had been sent out himself earlier in the missionary journeys with Paul. We don't know the exact which church was it, but he himself had been commissioned. And the laying on of hands would also have been with the elders. And again, I've seen that in every church that we've appointed elders that I've been a part of, that we call these men up, that we charge them, that we charge the church, and elders will literally put their hands on the new elders. And it's a symbolic gesturing of a charge, of a call, of being commissioned in this work. And so he says there, be careful. Don't be hasty. When you think about something being hasty, what do you think about? Get it done in a hurry? What else? What happens? Yeah, Josh? Acting without thought. Or much thought. it's kind of just an afterthought that, and especially in the context of elders, how can that happen, and how can churches be tempted to do that hastily?
People want elders so bad they'll choose anybody.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Been married to his wife, right? He's got a couple of kids. He's here mostly all the time. And I mean, we can kind of whittle it down real quick. And boy, and if he's a good businessman too, I mean, if he's ran a successful business, I mean, that's just a home run now, right? Make him an elder, right? And have you seen hastily, even with elders appointed in churches, and it was not good. It was, Matthew. Yeah, on appearance. No, yeah, absolutely. And so we got to avoid the extremes, because I've seen some churches on the other extremes. They've got the qualifications so high, nobody could be an elder, and they don't want elders. And so, but we also don't want to hastily. These are men who can have great impact on. And I love what the speakers kept saying yesterday. The difference between spiritual leaders, elders, and secular leadership is we've got souls at stake that are going to impact people's eternity. And that's what's at stake if we are hasty in doing that. And so he says, don't share in other people's sins. And again, that would be a temptation for Timothy as well. I mean, how easily would it have been for Timothy to put in some of his guys, kind of take his side, and he could get swept up in that, in purity and things that are not godly, as he's already given him. Watch your life and your doctrine. So we've already talked about the motives of these elders that are teaching things that are causing trouble are not good. They're insincere. They're ungodly. And so he talks about that. Verses 23 through 25, I don't have much to say about everybody's apparently got stomach problems at times that want to justify drinking alcohol, and I know that I'm not saying it's a sin to drink. I'm not saying it's a sin to drink, but it is funny how people that want to start drinking a lot and doesn't it say in 1 Timothy, don't drink water anymore, drink some wine? Timothy was so concerned about his reputation, his work, being associated with anything that would be considered drunkenness, that he's abstaining from wine, from common wine that had levels of alcohol content in it. And so he is, there's some backstory about Ephesus and the water supply and the pollution of that water that you could read commentaries if you want. Apparently, he's got that. I mean, some of you have been over in parts of the world, right? Haiti and other places, right? And they say what? Do not drink the water, right? And so that was why table wine was so important in the ancient world, is because they didn't have, refrigeration. They didn't have the way to purify the water in ways that we have. And so that is apparently causing a health issue for Timothy. And so, but he also, by doing this, he's able to stand on the apostolic authority of Paul. Nobody could charge Timothy of drunkenness or turning to alcohol, because obviously Paul is giving this instruction now. The sins of some are obvious, reaching the place of judgment ahead of them. The sins of others trail them behind. In the same way, good deeds are obvious, and even those that are not obvious cannot remain hidden. What he's talking about here is, let me just cut to this real quick. Timothy can be, and those in leadership can feel this as well, it can be very discouraging at times, because the problem can be you're dealing with people's lives who are not biblical, not moral. And the problem is some people's lives are obviously immoral, and then others are hidden. And Timothy is being told here that don't be overwhelmed. Remember that people will fully be recognized and rewarded. God is faithful. God will see everything in the end. even those that are not obvious cannot remain hidden forever. And so there may be people who fool us that you may know are not living right or presenting themselves in one way, and that can be very discouraging and overwhelming. Don't forget, God will bring judgment on those. And so if you can't correct and sort out everything, you can't see in the heart of everyone, of course. You can't even see in the heart, only the fruit. Don't be discouraged. God will see everything. God sees everything. And you do the best you can and deal with what you can deal with and leave the rest to God, so to speak. And that can be a comforting thought. That can be a frightening thought, depending on if you're trying to live right or not. So, all right, we will get into chapter 6 and kind of got bogged down a little bit in chapter 5, but we'll start finishing up the book.
Let every heart rejoice and sing. Let choral anthems rise. The ancient men and